Let's start from the first frame, reset everything. First, let's make sure the switch is set to the houses. We've got import houses, that's wired into the switch, that's being copy stamped. Let's set the simulation to frame 200. Now, because I've not changed anything in the simulation, my cache is still there, and my frame jumps straight to 200. If yours is simulating, please let it go until frame 200. So now there's two options we can do. We can either put down a ROP output driver, wire that up, and then you can save them to disk, and then later on we're going to have to call them back in from disk. In this case, for the purposes of this tutorial, we're just going to create a few null nodes in which we're going to lock the geometry. This will increase the size of your HIP file, but I'm not going to create 100 building clusters. I'm just going to create 3 for each type, so it shouldn't be too big. Before we're going to create them, let's actually make sure that our building cluster is big enough for the city blocks. Let's go back to object level and visualize the city blocks node. Now we can see that, for example, this city block here is way bigger. We're just going to leave this on, jump inside building clusters. Let's turn this back to show all objects so that we can actually see what we're doing. Set that back to 0 and increase the size of our grid. So the size, let's just double everything. Let's just go 150, 150, 20 rows and 20 rows. This setting should give us the same spacing, but with a lot more buildings. Let's just run the simulation again, visualize DOP import, and instead of playing it, let's just hit 200 and hit enter. It will simulate faster in the background. So not quite big enough yet. Let's just increase the size a bit more. Let's say 175, 175, 30, 30. Reset the simulation and go to 200 again. There we go. I'm going to say this is good enough. We've got this. Now, this is interesting, right? Because we've increased the number of buildings and made that a lot bigger, but we've not increased the size of our ground plane. So if we actually play through the simulation, we can see that they are falling through and then being attracted back. So that's not what we want. So let's increase the size of our ground object. We can see it's not quite big enough. 200 by 200. That should do the trick. One more time. Maybe go here and reset on the simulation tab and set it back to 200. Alright, that seems to have worked. So there we have our cluster. Now what we can do is we can put down a null node, wire into that the DOP import, visualize, press Ctrl, and lock it up. That's the second here. Now if we disconnect this, it will still be there. Be careful though, because if you unlock the node again, the data locked inside it will get lost. So let's try that, or I'm going to show you. I'm going to hit Ctrl, select that again, and this pop-up comes up. I will say unlock and gone, because there's nothing coming in and it's no longer storing the data. So let's wire that back up, because this one should still have it stored in there. Lock that and leave it there. Let's put down another null. Disconnect that. Reset the simulation. Wire that in to the null 2. I'm going to change the seed of my buildings. So in the stamp, in the copy, we can go to the first tab here. We should find our houses variation. And the $PT is right there. So we can just say ×5, and then we see them all changing in the viewport. Let's simulate that again, all the way to 200. Around 200, the simulation is kind of stabilized, so that's why I'm picking that number. It's quite arbitrary. If you want 250, go for 250. If you want 1,000, go for 1,000. It really doesn't matter. Let's wait for that simulation to finish. Alright. So let's Control lock that as well. Now if we disconnect that, that should stick. And if we go in and look at the two nodes, we can see that we have a different distribution of buildings on each. So let's do that one more time. I will just skip through the video for you guys because you've seen the process. And then we do the same 3 times for the commercial buildings. Don't forget to change the seed. Alright, so now I have 3 clusters of houses. I'm going to go up here, change the switch to 1, so that instead of houses, I will have commercial buildings. Let's reset the simulation first. That should be a lot bigger now. And let's have a look at the outbuildings. Yep, that's commercial buildings. We want to make sure that none of them are intersecting in the first instance. They're a bit snug, so let's just increase the size of our grid. Let's go to 200. But not increase the rows and columns, because we don't want any more buildings. This will do just fine. Now we can see they're already overlapping the ground plane again, so let's just contract it a little bit. That should fit on there. and there's enough space in between them. Alright, let's simulate that 3 times the same way we did. So we're going to make sure we reset the whole simulation. Maybe on DOP.NET hit reset simulation on the simulation tab, visualize the DOP import, play it to frame 200, and store that into a null node. I'll get back with you as soon as I've done that 3 times. Alright, so now I have 3 times a cluster of houses and 3 times a cluster of commercial buildings. Make sure you have the same. Just to be safe, let's just call them houses cluster 1 through 3 and commercial cluster 1 through 3. Alright, so let's just double check that our attributes are still on there. Right click, spreadsheet, and we can see that there's a load of attributes. That's because they come from the DOP simulation. Now we don't need most of these probably, but in the past I've had quite a few times where I actually needed an attribute in hindsight that I had removed before. So let's leave them all on here for now. It shouldn't really be a disk space hit anyway. And since we're not going to simulate much with them anyway, it doesn't really matter. We will probably delete most of them down the line anyway. Let's just double check that our own attributes are actually there. Let's just check the list. So we have up, we have normal, we have name, and we have building height, building ID, and building type. So they're all there. Let's leave it here. In the next part, we're going to actually fill the city blocks with the buildings. See you there.